Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I wanted to talk about the brand new marksman skill for last Epoch 1.2, and that is Heartseeker. I think the design of this skill is really neat, and it's also an interesting math problem to figure out exactly how much effective DPS does this added damage effectiveness of 100% translate into. We were playing around with it on stream, and eventually we managed to figure out the exact DPS of Heartseeker, given any number of minimum recurve or additional recurve, and even Bonepiercer here. You can plug all of that in a formula that I'll show you in a bit, and you can get the exact effective DPS and estimate how much additional DPS are you getting for every skill point investment. And I'll share the Google Sheet where you can do all of that for yourself in the description of the video. So keep an eye out for that if you need. So let's jump right in. So the way that skill works is you shoot an arrow, and that's going to hit an enemy, so there's nothing surprising there. However, when the arrow hits its target, it has a chance to continue through it and recurve to strike it again. Subsequent recurve chance is multiplied by 0.8, so the chance of actually successfully recurving again and again goes down after every single recurve, so it's not going to happen indefinitely. And if the target dies, it will find a new target. But how does recurve exactly work? Based on some examples given by ESG, we know that recurve chance above 100% doesn't get floored to 100 before getting multiplied by 0.8. It certainly gets floored to 100 for purposes of calculating whether or not you're going to hit. It's just a guaranteed hit. But consecutive recurves are going to multiply. Let's say you have a 200% value of recurve. It's going to get scaled by 0.8, so it's going to go down to 160%, which is still a guaranteed recurve. Even the following recurve is going to be guaranteed because 160 times 0.8 is 128, so still over 100%. So I've tried to capture the exact math of how all that works in this little spreadsheet. So we have the Heartseeker multiplier 0.8. We have 0% by default additional recurve chance. So we'll play around with this later. The minimum recurve is 0%, which means we have not invested in this node right here, which puts it at 66%. And Bonepiercer is at 0% as well. All of these are adjustable, but this is essentially the DPS that we're going to get if we have not invested anywhere in the skill tree. We haven't received additional recurve chance from items or idols or passive tree. Nothing else. So by default, the very first hit is guaranteed. We have a 100% chance to hit. The second hit is also guaranteed because we have a 100% recurve chance. That already means we get 2 hits by default. Now the third hit is where this 100% recurve chance goes down to 80%. So the third hit, there's a 20% chance that we do not succeed with it and we're stuck at 2 hits. And there's an 80% chance that we continue on. So this is the chance to fail that particular hit. So we have a 20% chance to fail, then the following hit, which means that we have a 20% chance that we do exactly 2 hits. Now with the third hit, we have 0.8 squared is the hit chance, and therefore 1 minus that is the chance to fail that particular hit. But in order to have had the opportunity to even attempt that hit, we must have had a success on getting the third hit. So then the probability of doing exactly 3 hits is failing on the third hit, failing to get the fourth hit, as well as succeeding to get a third hit, which is exactly 28.8%. So this column F right here ends up being your probability density function. And we can just drag all of these cells down in order to get it. And you can see by design, it has to add up to 100%. And it represents the chance of getting exactly this many hits. Not more, not less, exactly this many. Afterwards, things get easier to just calculate the damage. We know that each hit is exactly 100%. We haven't invested in Bonepiercer, so every hit is just 100%, which means that 2 hits is 200% worth of damage, 3 hits is 300% worth of damage, etc., etc. And then we multiply 200% worth of damage by 20% probability, and that gives us our damage distribution. And the sum of this column right here, 373, is exactly the effective damage of a single Heartseeker attack. So this is our baseline, 373. I have copied it just so we have it for reference when we start tinkering with the other values. But now let's play around with maybe skilling up a little bit. So let's just get out of here and let's just say you're playing marksman and you're going to invest 2 points into master archer. So that's 40% Heartseeker recurve chance. I think this is a must-have skill if anybody's considering running Heartseeker. That already is going to put us at 140 recurve, right? So this is our recurve chances, thanks to 48% extra. And here I have the hit chance, which is just flooring this down to 100%. And everything else functions pretty much the same. You'll notice this PDF gets shifted to the right a little bit as we are more likely to get more hits out of every single cast or attack of Heartseeker. And then the damage distribution shifts as well. So the net result here is we go from 373 damage to 516, which by the way is exactly 38% more damage. The 40% extra recurve, going from 0 to 40, is 38% more damage. So it's nearly 1-to-1 from extra recurve to more damage, which is very strong early on, that is. However, extra recurve chance certainly suffers from diminishing returns. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's just store this value of 516%. And let's just say we add another 40%. So let's say we go from 40 to 80, which by the way, can be just putting 4 points into this skill node right here. So if you go from 40 to 80, that puts us at 629%. And that is, so here we'll just replace this with the 516 that we have. So now that extra 40 recurve translates to 22% more damage. Intuitively, if you go from 140% to 180% more damage, that should translate to 29% more damage. So if this extra recurve actually read more damage, we would have gained for the second 40% set of more damage, we would have gained 29%. Instead, because it's this interesting recurve mechanic, it only translates to 22% more damage. And every additional recurve afterwards is lower value as well. However, one thing worth noting is that Bonepiercer, because of how it functions, and let's read it here real quick, it deals more bow damage after each recurve, up to a maximum. So with 3 points, it will give you 12% more damage after each recurve, up to 12 stacks. The way that I'm reading that is on the 12 recurve is going to give you 1.12 to the power of 12, which is insane because it's multiplicative with itself, at least the way I read it. I could be wrong on this one. The formula is easy enough to adjust if we happen to know for a fact exactly how it works. But assuming it's multiplicative with itself, we can put this value at 12%, and you can see the first recurve is 112% damage, etc., until the 12th recurve, which is 390% damage. So that's 290% more damage relative to what the damage would have been with a zero value here, right? Everything being 100%. But what I wanted to point out here is that Bonepiercer, you get a lot more value out of it by having high recurve chance as well as high minimum recurve. So there's really good synergy between Bonepiercer and very high values of these two here. So even though we have diminishing returns of extra recurve, I think those returns are not as diminishing if you have invested in Bonepiercer. So maybe actually let's test that out. Let's see if we can test that out. So if we go back and say we have 40% extra recurve with Bonepiercer being 12, that's 682% damage. And by default, by the way, we go from 454, let's move this over, to 682, which is 50% more damage. So 40% extra recurve, by the way, notice that 40% extra recurve is 50% more damage because of Bonepiercer. So right there, you're starting to notice the fact that extra recurve and Bonepiercer synergize extremely well. Now let's bump this up to 80%. We're up to 889, right? So let's see how much that is. So that is 30% more damage versus 40% extra recurve. So we go from, I think we were at 40 and 22. 38 and 22 more damage, multiplicative, to 50% more damage and 30% more damage. And 30% more damage is even better than going from 140% more damage, 180% more damage, meaning extra recurve was instead a more damage multiplier. And all of that means is extra recurve, diminishing returns are not as bad, not as diminishing if you have invested in Bonepiercer. And I think that's even more pronounced if we have minimum recurve, and we'll test that out as well. So let's go back to 0 here. Let's assume we have Bonepiercer. And now let's test the effect of minimum recurve. So let's say we start at 554. That's our baseline damage with 0, 0 and Bonepiercer. And then we can put the 66 minimum recurve. Just the minimum recurve on its own gives us 30% more damage. So this is 30% more damage, assuming you have Bonepiercer. If you do not have Bonepiercer, minimum recurve is a lot less valuable. And by the way, the minimum recurve is only this node right here. There's no other node with min recurve. So just keep that in mind. It's very easy to get 3 points in arrow mastery and then min recurve. Assuming we have now these two, let's see what the effect of adding 40% extra recurve is, the one from the passive tree. That brings us up to 843% more, 843% effective damage, which is 42% more damage versus when we had a 0% here. Note that this is better than having a 40% more multiplier for the first 40% of extra recurve. Now let's see what happens as we keep going and adding more recurve. The next 40% is exactly 27% more damage. So again, diminishing returns are certainly there. However, it's not as bad as you might think. Now let's think about an Endgame Heartseeker build. Not only are you going to have 40% in the passive tree, right here, 40% recurve. We're also going to have potentially 40% recurve here, another 10 here, so that's 50% recurve. You also have recurve chance per dexterity from nimble threads. And let's say we have 100 dex. I'm not sure how much dex stacking is going to be a great option for Heartseeker builds, but 100 dex is fairly easy to obtain. At 100 dex, that's another 50% recurve. So we're already at 100 just between these three. Let's say that we want to play Arrow of the Ravager, which is another 50% recurve and a 50% more damage multiplier. So that puts us at 150 recurve. There are also, I think, items and idols, especially on the chest piece, you can get up to 60 recurve. So let's just say that we have 200% recurve chance. That is certainly viable. You can definitely get over 250%. Probably the cap is near 300%. But let's just see what happens if we go from 200 to 300%. Let's just see if there's even a benefit to going from 2 to 300. At 200% recurve, we end up with 1,627 damage, which is 52% more relative to having 80% recurve. So remember, this was 80% recurve. And now let's see what happens if we manage to literally just min-max every single item, stack a ton of dexterity, and get to 300% recurve. I think higher is even viable as well. Let's just see 300 if it's even worth. At 300% recurve, we're talking about a 20% more damage relative to 200% recurve. Given how significant of an investment that is, I'm not convinced that it is worth it. Getting 100% recurve for only 20% more damage. The only other thing to note is there's also this node here, Dragon Fang, which gives you bow fire damage per stack based on the number of consecutive recurves that you've hit. And here, based on our probability density function, we can tell exactly how likely we are to get up to 20 consecutive hits. So to get 20 exactly consecutive hits, actually let's say 20 or more, with 300 extra recurve and 66 minimum recurve, to get 20 plus hits, actually that's not true. This is 20 recurves. 21 hits is 20 recurves, because the first hit is not a recurve. So to get 20 recurves with this much stats, like basically extreme investment, we have 1 in 200 probability to get that. However, if you look at getting 15 or more hits, which is more reasonable, it's also a pretty good bonus already. 15 flat fire. Sorry, actually that's 60 flat fire because we can invest 4 points in Dragon Fang. So to get that 60 flat fire, we have a 7% chance. So every 7 out of 100 Heartseeker shots, so better than 1 in 20. That's pretty reliable. I mean, you're definitely going to have at least 12 hits, 1 in 4 to get 12 plus hits. And that is over 40 flat damage. So getting higher extra recurve and minimum recurve are going to significantly boost Dragon Fang. So if you choose to go that route, you want to min-max around these as well. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, and if you want to just stick to Bonepiercer, min recurve 66, I would probably recommend somewhere between 150 and 200 recurve. I think that is a very reasonable amount. That is not difficult to get. And that puts you at 1,600 effective damage for your Heartseekers. And that is without counting the 50% more damage from Arrow of the Ravager and any other more damage multipliers like against all odds. If you choose to go a damage over time route, this node is super interesting also. It functions similar to Bonepiercer, where you get plus 12% more multiplicative for up to 12 stacks. This one is plus 15 dot more damage, more ailment rather, for up to 8 stacks. I'd be curious how these two stack together because they should work together. This one is more bow damage, which should apply to ailments as well. And this one is more ailment damage. So I suspect they're multiplicative. So it's 1.12 to the power of 12 times 1.15 to the power of 8 if you happen to get to 12 hits. And I think that is going to be absolutely phenomenal damage bonuses. Just out of curiosity, let's just see what that is. 1.15 to the power of 8. So that is a 3x multiplier. So it's 205% more damage for your 8th hit, sorry, for your 8th recurve and beyond. And we already concluded the Bonepiercer for the 12th hit and beyond is a 290% more multiplier. If you combine the two, that's going to be massive, massive DPS for these late hits, in which case it might even be worth it to invest in even higher extra recurve. So that's basically the spreadsheet that we have here. You can play around with it. I'll share it with you. The green cells here are what you can edit. These are basically stat lines based on your skill investment, based on your itemization. This is the baseline multiplier of 0.8. Don't change that. That's just based on what the skill describes here. This 0.8, it's a hard set value. And then this over here is essentially your effective damage that you're going to get based on this damage distribution. And these are the number of hits you might be getting with the PDF displaying the essential probability of getting that many hits. So here, for example, we have a 0% chance to get 1 hit because we are always going to get more than 1 hit. We are always, in fact, going to get more than 5 hits. There's a 1.7% chance only to get 6 hits, but there's the remaining 98.3 chance to get 7 or more hits. So anyway, I hope you had some good fun with me here going through the Heartseeker math. I think it's an interesting skill. I like the skill design, that it makes us think a little bit, makes us plan out and figure out exactly how the math works so that we can be better educated on what values we should be aiming for. Now, for me personally, I might play Heartseeker Marksman for season start. We will see. I haven't decided just yet, but I'm very much leaning towards it. I'm just trying to grapple with the fact that Marksman didn't get any passive changes, didn't get any passive tree updates other than just this little one here. I do think the Marksman passive tree is really, really rough, quite outdated and not very pleasant. A lot of the skill nodes are just not things that excite me and not things that I would want to invest in. But still, Heartseeker does look fun. I like the skill itself. So if you are considering enjoying it, potentially alongside me, check out this spreadsheet. I'll share it with you. And you can see, play around with, based on your build planner, what you think your effective DPS is going to be like. So I'll be looking to share my season starter plans over the next few days. Keep an eye out for that. We're probably going to be cooking the build on tomorrow's stream. We'll see how it goes. But until then, thank you so much. Much love and gochiso samareshita.